It was 1978 and I was 9 years old. My dad and I were going to a local hobby store, the kind that would sell remote control cars, planes, model trains, and model rockets. But they were selling something new in 1978, and that was a personal computer. The personal computer we were there to pick up was from a company called Ohio Scientific. I remember my dad negotiating with the salesperson about maybe adding some more memory or adding in a little television monitor. I was kind of bored, so there was a little bin of trinkets near the counter, and I remember picking up this little magnifying glass right here, actually. And the salesman said, "Okay, well, I'll throw in this magnifying glass if you buy the computer." We took the computer home that day. So we hooked it up to a little 9-inch, closed circuit television monitor and a little cassette player that we had so that we could load and save programs. But I remember the computer came with a book, and this is the book that it came with. Basic and the Personal Computer. And that actually is the computer that we had, although we had a little different monitor. So in the preface of this book, it asks the question, exactly what is a personal computer? Because back in 1978, people didn't really know what a personal computer was. They were new, exciting. But one of the things they said, really, in reading this now, kind of described my experience and my relationship with this new personal computer. They said it's the human connection that explains what all the excitement is about. It's the power of personal computers to act as extensions of the human mind, inviting journeys to worlds few individuals have experienced before. That's what drew me in. There weren't many programs you could buy for the Challenger 2P. So this book contained a lot of type-in programs, games, databases, simulations, art that you could type in the basic programming language. There were programs to play Crazy Eights, generate computer art, or simulate a space colony. One of the first games that truly captivated me was on page 270. And that program was Planet X Lander. I typed it in, and I was transported to become the pilot of a spaceship that was trying to land on Planet X. And I was in control of the thrust of the rockets. And if I thrust too much, I might end up running out of fuel. And if I don't thrust enough, then I might end up crashing on the planet. So you had to make sure that you were adjusting the thrust of the rocket so that you would come in for a very soft landing. And I learned BASIC by typing in programs like this. But more than just learning how to type in programs and learning the programming language, the cool thing about this book was that at the end of each chapter, there were project ideas. And those project ideas stirred the imagination and got the gears turning. One of the things in the Planet X Lander project ideas was extend the simulation so that you would have to control the spaceship as it heads back up to the mothership from the planet's surface, using the fuel that you had remaining from the descent. And of course, you had to dock with the mothership, and if you docked too hard, you'd crash, and if you again ran out of fuel, you would either float in space forever or crash onto the planet's surface. It was those types of games and simulations that were more than books, more than television, more than movies, gave me an ability to not just be a viewer, but a participant, to change the simulation, to become part of the world and interact with the world. That thrill of creating something new, of going into a world that you could interact with and control, really captivated me. And it led to a full career as a computer programmer. I started by writing my own little games in BASIC, or modifying games that I found in magazines or books. Changing the rules, changing the setup. In adventure games, perhaps adding rooms or items to be picked up. But then it moved into making my own little games and my own little art. When I got the Commodore 64 that had color and sound, I would write programs that would make music or pretty pictures on the screen. I even wrote my own bulletin board system for the Commodore 64 that I ran while I was in high school. We had a second phone line because my dad worked at a company called CompuServe, and he needed it to dial into the mainframes that CompuServe ran on. But by that time, he was a manager and wasn't really dialing in much. So that second line sat mostly unused. And so I turned it into a bulletin board system. After high school, I went to college and got a degree in computer science, started a career in programming, and eventually started my own business. A business that was founded by a personal curiosity that started with that very first personal computer. I didn't know it then, but looking back, I was at a turning point in computer history. Planet X Lander, for example, was just part of a long lineage of computer space games. Started with a lunar lander program that was written for a mini computer, and then moved to Jupiter Lander on the VIC-20, which I played, and the Lunar Lander video game, as well as other space games such as Elite or No Man's Sky. And the BASIC that I was using on the Challenger 2P, that was the first product of a small company called Microsoft. In fact, Bill Gates wrote a letter to hobbyists that scolded them for daring to steal Microsoft BASIC from computer tapes and use it on their own computers. That letter upset some members of the People's Computer Company, which then wrote a specification for their own BASIC called Tiny BASIC that some view as the start of the open source programming movement. But that Tiny BASIC became so popular that the People's Computer Company magazine created a special edition just for Tiny BASIC. This is the very first issue of that magazine called Dr. Dobbs' Journal, which became one of the most popular programming language magazines and was a magazine that I subscribed to and learned a lot of programming from in the days before the internet. I know many programmers got their start with BASIC and with Dr. Dobbs. The very first issue of Dr. Dobbs was a little too early for me. I got this copy from a wonderful man named Harry Stewart, who also had an illustrious career in computer programming. One of the things he is known for is for creating the implementation of the Pilot programming language for the Atari 8-bit computers. That first personal computer that I was doing all that programming on, the Ohio Scientific Challenger 2P, well, it just became a footnote in history. The company was eventually sold. However, there's stories in that company too. It was the first personal computer company to be headed by a woman. And her husband was a prolific inventor who went on to start many other companies and had many patents and had a very colorful career in technology after Ohio Scientific was sold. As you can see, there are so many fascinating stories, lessons, and bits of history to uncover. So welcome to the People's Computer Club. We're going to learn a lot and have loads of fun. I'm so glad you're here. Welcome.